Welcome to the Professional Speaking Show. My name's John Ball. In the area of leadership, your authority isn't always proven by your ideas. It's revealed when things get tense. My guest today is Julie Holunga. She works with leaders and teams on conflict, hard conversations, and the moments where credibility either sharpens or quietly erodes. We talk about why overly soft language lowers status, how leaders accidentally practice what Julie calls lazy leadership, and how to stay deliberate when emotions are running high. This is not about being confrontational, it's about being trusted when it matters. Let's get started.
I am very happy to be welcoming Julie Holunga. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Good to see you, John.
I've been very much looking forward to speaking with you. And one of the things that I've been enjoying starting off some of the episodes with recently is just finding out, based on what you do and the area that you work in, do you have some ideas, opinions that may be a little contrary or different to what you hear other people in the industry teaching and talking about?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I was working with some clients around conflict, and essentially they were sweeping it under the rug. And there was a lot of emotion in the room. There was a lot of pushback. And finally, I said to them, you're practicing lazy leadership. And they were so taken back by that. And they kept saying, no, I'm not lazy. I'm not lazy. I said, no. You're practicing lazy leadership. And I still to this day get a lot of pushback on that. And what I mean by I'm not calling leaders lazy, but rather there is, because we're back-to-back meetings, we're going so fast. There's so many demands on our time, on our headspace. We're dealing with so much that when it comes to conflict, when it comes to having those hard conversations, that we tend to be lazy because we don't want to take the time, or we feel we don't have the time to address those situations or those individuals. And that's what I mean by practicing lazy leadership, is that it takes effort. It takes preparation to go have a conversation with someone that's hard. That's why it's called a hard conversation, right? And I've met maybe 3 people in almost 15 years of doing this work who enjoy conflict. They thrive in that environment. But everyone else, the 99.9% of us who don't like being in that place, when they're not deliberate, they are practicing lazy leadership. So you have a choice, right? You can practice lazy or you can practice deliberate. And I've gotten a lot of pushback on that, both a lot from strangers, I will say, like on LinkedIn, or I had someone, I was in a course and in an online course, and in the middle of the program, like an all-day thing, this guy I never met before, I hadn't been in a breakout room, anything, puts in a private chat to me, you should really think about what you have on your website around lazy leadership. That's not a good thing. And you're going to really turn people off. I thought,
has it been turning people off? Or has it been turning the right people off?
Well, exactly. And that's how I think about it. It's going to turn off the person who doesn't want to be deliberate. It's going to turn off the person who doesn't want to make the effort. Now, it's not to say that my clients love hearing that, but they know, all right, fine. Yeah, you're right. You're right. It's going to take me time and effort, and I don't feel I have it right now. Yeah. So
I don't think
anybody
likes hearing that something's going to take time and effort, right?
Right.
It's like we'd much rather hear instant solution, or do this and it's done.
Yes.
Job done. And that's what people seem to want all the time, rather than stuff that actually make the bigger long-term difference of having to put in a bit of work up front. I completely get where you're coming from with that. Don't disagree with you at all. I wonder if most of that pushback, it sounds like it is a lot to do just with the word lazy. Like, people do not like that word. Is that pretty much?
Right. Yes. Yeah. But I'm not here. So I had a client years and years ago say to me, she was making an introduction to a potential client for me, and she said, Julie is the person, she's great, you'll love her, but she's the person who will nail your ass to the wall if you don't do what you say you're going to do. And I was like, oh my gosh, is that your experience with me? She said, no, it's what we all need. And so if people don't like that word lazy, I'm not saying it in a way of you're lazy, but rather in moments you're practicing this lazy leadership, and it's a reactive, right? I could say all these other names, but the fact of the matter is the behavior is the same.
Yeah. I I was noticing from some of your profile that it seems I could be wrong on this, so you can correct me if I am. That you kind of came into like conflict areas and conflict resolution kind of work by wanting to help women, particularly who you felt were being too soft or not strong enough in their language in the work situation. Is that right?
Yes, because I see it all the time, like literally before, we start our conversation. I was on with a client who called me this morning because things have blown up, and she just said, "Can I talk to you for 15 minutes?" She works on a trading floor. She's wildly successful. And one of her peers talks down to her to such an extent. You imagine a trading floor, like loud,
Mhm.
lots of people, lots of conversations. But he talks down to her and is so demeaning with his words and his actions that other people have started complaining about him to their boss. She's told me about this guy before, and she said, it doesn't impact me. It doesn't, I know what I'm doing. I'm great with my clients. They love me. This guy, no, I'm not going to share the words that she used, but if he wants to behave this way, that's on him. I'm not like, she's already had conversations with other people. But the reason she called me today was she didn't realize it was impacting other people on her desk. And all of a sudden, now that it has something to do with someone else, now all of a sudden she's stepping up and she's using, not that, and I would not say she was being meek before this, but now she's stepping up and she's saying, no, you're not going to talk like that, because she realizes now that other people are being affected by it. He doesn't talk this way to anyone else. It's just her. And there's so many things like competition, insecurities. There's so much going on, but it has gone on now long enough that I don't know what's going to happen, but it's really ugly. And she's in a really good place because she's been successful. She's highly regarded. She's made a name for herself, that it doesn't make her feel diminished in any way. But what I see from, that's unusual, because what I see from, and mostly women, but I do see it and hear it from men as well, of this, that they step back or they use language that puts them in a lower status position. And all of a sudden, when you're thinking about trying to influence someone, if you're in this lower status, it's really hard to influence. It's really hard to build trust. It's really hard to collaborate, to problem solve, all the things that are on our plates on a regular basis.
Absolutely. I just
Yeah.
recently, making me think about a book I just read recently. I don't know if you've read it, but there's a young woman who had worked in sort of high levels of Facebook, and she's written a book about her experience there called Careless People. Very, very interesting book. But a lot of her experiences are talking about some of the ways that she was treated and spoken to by people who were her seniors in the company and different places that she's worked. And it definitely will make me think about that. And what would be some of the things that you could recommend, especially for women, but maybe for people who do have that kind of feeling of not being strong enough with their language, not having that sort of strength or feeling comfortable to take a position of strength? And what's the kind of language you should be using, and how can we be doing that in a way that's not going to just get people's backs up and suddenly
Right.
people turn
Right.
on us?
Well, there are two things that I always recommend. On one hand, it's your language, the actual words coming out of your mouth. And the other piece that has a huge impact is the tone that we use. So if I come and say, John, you sent me the wrong link. This is your fault I'm late. You're like you said, you're backed up. You get into that defensive mode. On the other hand, if I come and I say, hey, John, in a very neutral tone, I had the wrong link. That's why I'm late. We go on and we have a perfectly fine conversation. So really paying attention to that tone and the pace at which you speak, in addition to the words that you use. so that if there is a hard conversation to be had, the idea is that you don't want someone to be defensive. You don't want someone to be backed up against the wall, but rather you want them to be engaging so you can have a conversation to make progress, to make things better. So if there's some kind of conflict, let's say, coming in and apologizing and taking all the ownership of whatever the challenge is, that's not putting you in the right position. Now, if you were late or you made a mistake or let's see, there was something that you did wrong, yes, apologize, but then move on. Don't keep apologizing, right? Say, okay, I made this mistake. I had the wrong information. How do we prevent this from happening down the road? What do I need to do differently next time? And you notice that the tone is very neutral. It's not accusatory. It's not meek. As opposed if I come in and keep apologizing and apologizing, you're lowering your status and keep lowering that status, and you're lowering your ability to influence other people. And that's what I see in the workplace, the big thing that we all need to be conscious of is how
Yeah.
we are influencing or not influencing people.
It's super important, undoubtedly. I know you've worked with many teams and people to help them do this as well. But let me ask you, uh, there are still many organizations and companies where there may be still a lot male dominated, or hierarchies are still male dominated in many degrees, where there's an unhealthy modeled attitude of never apologize for
Right.
anything. In those sorts of environments, if that's what you're surrounded by, how do you get through that? Do you just need to find a better environment to work in, or
Well,
is there other ways to deal with that?
yeah. I mean, there are times where I say to people, unfortunately, the answer is to leave. I mean, I don't say that's the first thing to try, but what I what I always talk about is being conscious of when you're using conditional language, like maybe I could come on and be a guest on your show versus declarative. Hey, John, we seem to be on the same page. I would love to be on your show. Right. So there's this conditional that again puts you in that lower status. You're unable to influence. It's maybe, it's would, could, think I could add some value versus my recommendation is X, Y, and Z. And really paying attention to where you're using that conditional language, with whom, in what circumstances, versus using declarative. I was working with another IT company that we all know quite well. And when it was with a group of female leaders, and one of them was an engineer. She was on a team of all men, where you just described that environment. And she said to me, I can't talk like that. If I talk like that, it's going to come back to bite me on my performance review. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, like one of her roles is to review code and to find bugs or issues or mistakes. And she's very good at what she does, and she can look at it and quickly find it. And she says if she's sitting in a room of 3 or 4 of her colleagues, peers, and they don't see it and she sees it first, she will sit there and wait and give them time to find it. And I said to her, well, are we talking a minute or 2? And she said, no, sometimes they don't find it. And I said, okay, so you're sitting there for potentially half an hour waiting for them to find the mistake that you already found. But if you come and say, oh, it's line 522, they're going to be pissed. They're going to be angry that you found the mistake before they did. And she said, yeah, I can't do it.
Well,
and I said,
crazy.
okay, so if there are 4 of you in the room, let's add up how much time and money is being wasted because you're sitting there waiting for them to catch up to you, right? And so we did talk about some different ways. She got an enormous amount of pushback when she changed her behaviors, but she stuck with it. And eventually they came around. But I mean, in my opinion, I haven't met the fellow engineers. There's a lot of ego playing into that. That's not
Sure.
serving anyone.
One of the things that's kind of come up in my head, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this because I know many other people are in a similar position of me of not really enjoying confrontational situations. So,
Exactly.
I tend to be more on the non-confrontational side of things. I think that probably the majority of people do live in that space. And that may be one of the reasons why we don't. I do think there's a lot of people who take advantage of that in other people. There are people who really don't mind or are unfazed by conflict or know that other people don't want that and will push boundaries or push buttons because of that, because they can take advantage in those sorts of situations. And I think this is super important. And I will say, I'm kind of thinking back to one time where back in my airline days, where there was a big conflict situation on a flight, essentially. One girl, I'll share it with you very quickly, but one girl accusing another stewardess of potentially having stolen some money. And this was like a charity donation that passengers had given this woman a tip. And they're not supposed to do that. So she said, I'll put it into the charity bag and we'll do that. And then the money went missing before it got put into the charity bag. And this one young lady accused the other stewardess who'd been given the tip of stealing it. And so big thing rose up. It was very distressing, very upsetting for people, but I couldn't let it go. And I had to confront that situation and confront the woman who was accusing the other woman, because I just knew that something was wrong there and how it all got handled. But I didn't handle it very well. And this is what I'm kind of coming to. I did not know how to handle that situation and I did not deal with it very well. I was kind of shaking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I confronted it. I'm not sure it helped anything. Maybe made me feel a bit better for addressing it, but I'm not sure it did anything beneficial for the outcome there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that happens. And that is most people. Like I said, 99% don't want to have the conversation, but there are people who, and not necessarily with that, but will instigate conflict because they want to see a behavioral change. And I hear sometimes people say, no, I'm going to throw, like I always think of it as like I'm throwing a grenade into a conversation because I need people to think differently. We can't keep thinking the same thing. When you said that you confronted it because you couldn't let it go, what I always explain to people is that we have, across a spectrum, there are people who are mislabeled as avoiding conflict, right? And in fact, what I see is that they're going to do everything they can to prevent it from happening in the first place. But then there are people who, because it takes a lot of energy for them to address the situation. So they would rather scale it back before it blows up. Where what I'm hearing you say was that, you couldn't let it go. What I'm hearing is it was sitting with you. There was something not quite right. It takes just as much energy for you not to address it as it does from someone at the other end of the spectrum to address that. And when people understand it's uncomfortable for both ends of the spectrum, then all of a sudden it turns down the anxiety, the uncomfortableness. Like people might still be uncomfortable, but they're not feeling attacked in any way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the issue, isn't it? It's like there's things that feel like an attack. And in this situation, I felt like it was a friend and a colleague of mine who was being attacked. And there was a desire to want to defend her
Sure.
from that as well, where she didn't feel able to herself. Not that it was really my job to do it, but
Yeah, right.
But that was like the motivation for kind of stepping in there, but it didn't help the situation. But I know one of the things that you do talk about and work with people on is that there are ways sometimes in which conflict can be constructive.
For sure.
And I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about that. Like, how can we have constructive conflict in a workplace?
Yeah, so this comes from some work out of Eckerd College where essentially you realize you're in conflict, right? There's this precipitating moment. You approach someone approaches you, and it's conflict. You disagree strongly, right? This is not like just a misunderstanding. Oh, sorry about that. And we move on. This is like emotions are running high. I often hear from colleagues or clients that their shoulders become like earrings because they're so tense, right? So you're in that precipitating moment. You have one choice to make. You either take a destructive path where you're focused on the person. There's a lot of confirmation bias going on. This is what John always does. And there's the constructive side where you're focused on the task. And when you're focused on the task, you are then saying to either out loud or to yourself, I am confident that John and I can figure this out together. I am looking for different perspectives. I'm looking for ways to brainstorm together to figure out another potential solution. And if I'm feeling a lot of emotion, anger, frustration, disappointment, I will share that in a not in a demonstrative way, but it may sound like, hey, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall and we're not getting anywhere. And then you may suggest, like, can we come back to this? So it's a delayed response, which is not an avoidance, right? Avoidance is, I'm not coming back to this. Delayed response is, can we come back to this tomorrow morning? Can I sleep on it? And then you be sure that you come back and continue the conversation. So that's constructive. And when there's a bump in the road, when someone's digging their heels in, because they're always like, you can only control yourself. You can only stay on that constructive path. If someone else is on that destructive path and digging their heels in, there's some things that you can do to try to elevate them to the constructive path. But bottom line, it's up to them. Right. So you can ask questions. You can say to them, acknowledge, validate them. I hear your frustration. I know this is not fun. I know that you've been dealing with this for months. Like, you can acknowledge them. It doesn't mean you agree with their behavior or their actions, but you can acknowledge their emotions that are going on, and you can be curious. And at a certain point, you said earlier, like, are there just some times where you just have to back off? Yes. And maybe you need to find a different colleague. Maybe that isn't going to work. But I always say, like, let's try and keep trying to see if we can make it work.
I guess one of my concerns, and this is something that I think I've observed, and I maybe even, I say I've experienced it as well, maybe on both sides, but sometimes we can end up, I think, falling into language and behaviors in those sorts of situations that are insincere, that just like the psychological speaks.
Right.
All right. You know exactly what's being said, but it's kind of like when someone says bless your heart kind of thing. It's like, you know what they really what they really mean.
There's no blessing going on.
No, exactly. Yeah. So you know what they really mean. I think that happens in a lot of situations. So is there a way that you could talk to about maybe being able to have an authentic level of directness that still allows you to not feel like you're just talking the sort of corporate psychological BS language, that you can actually say what you mean in a good way?
Right. So I often tell people, when we communicate, there's the verbal, the nonverbal, right? What's not being said, body language. And I always laugh when if I'm talking to someone and it's a hard conversation and they're saying, yeah, I'm totally on board. I'm totally on board, at the same time that they're shaking their head. Right. So when there's that disconnect, sometimes people clue into it and they're like, hold on. They consciously see someone shaking their head, but the words don't match what their body's doing. But sometimes, especially if we're on the phone or we're not able to see someone, you can't read that body language, but you want those things to line up, right? I'm always taken aback. Like, if you're watching the news and someone's sharing a story that's kind of heartbreaking for some reason, or is like, I love stories about puppies being adopted and, good news about that, but they're not smiling. You're like, this is very confusing. This is a disconnect here. So what I always recommend to people is to be conscious of their body language in addition to their words, and make sure there's a match. So don't say, John, I really want you to feel safe that you can say anything to me. And you say, okay. And you share your frustration with me. And then, I'm like this. I back up. Well, all right. You said your piece. Agree to disagree. So this literally happened with a client a couple of weeks ago, where we were in a team meeting. There were 10 leaders. There's the C-suite. And we'd spent the whole day together. And at the end, revealing a lot of, I didn't know this about you, or now I understand what you mean when you're communicating this way. So we were really peeling back this onion, and it was a fantastic conversation. And at the end of the day, one of the team members said to the CEO, hey, I really want feedback from you. I want to know, from your perspective, where I need to strengthen some relationships with my peers. And the CEO said, yeah, I'm happy to. And she said, yeah, I'd like to know. So the CEO said, well, you and John need to strengthen your relationship. You need to communicate more often. You need to share information with each other. It's not that they disliked each other, but there wasn't enough collaboration going on. And the individual who asked for the feedback said, "Oh, well, thanks for calling me out in front of everyone." And the CEO, I saw her lean back. She was 30 seconds ago. You asked me to tell you where you needed to strengthen some relationships. I gave you what you asked for, and now you're angry. So then my follow-up with the CEO was to ask, what are the dynamics going on? Was that typical behavior? Is there something else beneath the surface? So when there is behavior like that, when you're taken aback, where'd that come from? Not in the moment in front of everyone, but what the CEO and I talked about was how she could approach that conversation to say, hey, how are things going? What's going on? What happened when we were in our offsite that caused that reaction? I was surprised by it. When you did that, that really shocked me. And you put me in a really awkward position with your teammates. What's going on? Open the conversation, not to bring that wall of defense up, but to put it down and to see what's going on. Why did you respond that way? Why did you ask for that question? What were you hoping for? So we'll see. We'll see what comes out of that. That when you have a strong reaction to something, that's the question always in my back pocket. Hey, I'm noticing some frustration here. What's going on? And so it's not to say you're being this way, but to recognize, I notice you're frustrated. What's going on? Come out of the conversation and try to see what's beneath the surface, right? Because there's a lot there. I'm not going to tell you what came out of that, but there's a lot under the surface there, the iceberg.
Yeah.
And that's what you want to get to. They may be telling you something, right? They're nodding their head, but their language is different, or the other way around. You want to get to what's beneath the surface, and that might take a few conversations.
Yeah. So what I really like about what you said is that I've been in teams, many of us have, and do sometimes find that certain leadership people speak with they talk in corporate speak the whole time.
Yeah.
And don't really talk like real people. And it sounds like you're generally encouraging people you can still be professional and talk like a real person and have a real conversation, and you'll probably get much better results from it as well.
Exactly. And it is, the book Radical Candor, which I love.
Yeah, great book.
It is speaking to what you just said. It has given, unintentionally, people an excuse to behave poorly in some cases, not at all the intentions of the author, who I'm really impressed with and love her approach. But her approach is don't sweep things under the rug, and then people are really shocked, right? You don't want to have a performance review and then find out that you've been delivering, your writing is really bad. Well, you've waited a year to tell me this, right? So that radical candor, yes. Radical, yes. And to your point, John, be professional, right? Be a real person. It drives me insane coming to teams, and because a lot of times when I work with teams, I'll talk to each individual before we come to the offsite all together. And I know that there are issues, and they're just sweeping it under the rug. And eventually someone's going to trip over that rug because we just keep shoving it under, waiting for something to change. And so that goes back to where we started, talking about being deliberate, being thoughtful. How am I going to approach this conversation? And what I always say to people is, don't script it out, but how are you going to start the conversation? What does the first 10 seconds of the conversation sound like? And what is success for you? And that does need to be prepared.
Yeah. And it makes sense that
Right?
it would.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to think of those things in the moment as well. So yes. I wonder do you incorporate any things like non-violent language, or do you have particular frameworks that you find are helpful to work with teams on, and that could be useful for understanding how to manage these sorts of situations?
Yeah. So I have what I call the 3 C's for conflict competence. And my goal is to get this out there to as many people as possible. But the 3 C's are this. The first is clarity. So to understand yourself, your natural reaction to conflict. And I have people all the time tell me, well, with this individual, with my peers, I want to change things up. So I'll throw a bomb just to get people to think different. When I'm with my direct reports, I'll sit back a little bit. I don't want to have that confrontation. When I'm with our board, I'm going to overanalyze everything that I've said to them. So it depends on the people, the situations, the circumstances. But that first piece is clarity. Like, where are you holding back? Where are you driving in? And where do you need to be more involved? So that's the clarity. The second piece is really thinking about that constructive path, right? Like the choice that I have and wanting to be on the constructive path. But the choice is, I'm in this moment. Am I going to go down the destructive path where I'm blaming everyone else? I'm not owning my role in the situation. I'm denying anything to do with it. I'm not learning anything, right? That's a destructive path, blame and destructive. Or I'm choosing that constructive path where I'm focused on the task. I'm taking accountability if I had a different perspective or made a mistake. So that's the second C is choice. And then the third C is communication. How are you communicating in that moment, right? So it's what we talked about. It's language, it's timing, it's thinking about what does the other person need to hear. So we all know about the golden rule, treat others as they want to be treated. Tony D'Alessandro talks about the platinum rule, which is treat others as they want to be treated. And I've brought this up a whole nother level to what I call the titanium rule. And this plays into the communication piece of speak to others the way they want and need to be spoken to. Because too often what I see in conflict is I need to prove to you, John, that I'm right. I need you on my side. I need you to see my perspective. And I'm coming into this conversation to prove that to you. And instead, we've talked about influence. We're talking about building trust. If you think to yourself, again, in advance, what does John need to hear? Does he need data points? Does he need stories? Does he need to know how my idea or recommendation is going to get us to where we want to be at the end of the year or next year? If I'm really thinking about what does the other person need, you will be able to influence people 1,000 times more successfully with less effort. So I joke around that when my kids were younger and, they would constantly be bickering about whose turn it was to empty their dishwasher or pick up dog poop or, clean up or whatever it was. I would think, what do they need to hear in this moment? Not just empty the dishwasher. I don't want to keep repeating myself. They don't care. Emptying the dishwasher doesn't matter to them. But thinking about what do they need to hear. So this actually, my kids are now both in university, so we're not having those conversations anymore. Thank God. Because they do think when they come home, they still think they're in the dining hall experience and they just put their tray down and then they walk off. So there's always that adjustment. But literally yesterday, I was talking to my daughter and she's talking about they sign leases for the next year now in the fall. And when does the lease start? And we don't want to double pay rent, essentially. And what I wanted to say to her was I'm not going to pay 2 rents, right? Because that's my bank account it's coming out of. But instead I said to her, what's your preference? What do you want to do? Where do you want to live? And is there anything that we need to be conscious of with this lease? And there are 2 different, it's complicated, but 2 different leases and essentially not paying double rent. But instead of just saying, I'm not going to pay double rent to her, I asked her about the start and the end of leases and all the details. And all of a sudden she said, oh, Mom, what I just realized is I got to be careful because I don't want to pay both leases. In the moment, I'm like, oh, you don't want to pay it? Okay. But she got there. And yes, it was a little bit of me leading her to that point. But just really thinking about helping her think through, and especially she's 19, like starting to think about the adulting that will need to happen.
Yeah.
starting soon, but
Well,
really thinking that way.
I think you very nicely anticipated something what I
Hmm.
would have asked, which is like how this maybe transposes into other parts of our lives as well, the benefits that we may find in other areas. To lead on from that, do you find your children or others around you modeling your ways of communicating and being better communicators because they get to experience someone who's doing a better job of it?
Yeah, I hope so. No, I do. In the moment when they're around me, maybe more so. I do have people say to me, especially around language, and especially if someone's seen my TED Talk and they are very aware that I'm hyper focused on words. They'll say to me, I don't really feel comfortable speaking around you because I'm so in my head of like, I got to use strong leadership language. And, I joke around and say, look, I researched this. I've talked about this for over a decade, and sometimes I make a mistake as well. So, expectations bring them down a bit. But what I do see with my kids is how they're interacting with others. And one of my son's closest friends, they've been roommates. This is their third year at university being roommates. And I noticed that when he came to visit, he's constantly asking really good questions, like not annoying, but like really good questions. Sometimes they're really funny. Like, what would you do if you won the lottery tomorrow? Those, which is one of our favorite conversations, but also just asking really powerful questions. And I pointed it out to my son and I said, Ethan asked these great questions. Have you noticed that? And he's like, oh yeah, we all notice it. And so sometimes it's pointing out, because I personally feel that when we ask really good questions that are not demeaning and not, trying to put someone like, why the hell did you just do that? But really practicing curiosity, that you're then able to have a really strong relationship. You're able to influence, you're able to build trust. You're able to have those hard conversations without the corporate speak, right? And you're able to make progress, whether it's a challenge or just we're trying to move this project along.
Yeah. I would say hopefully that's been one of my developmental skills as a podcast host, is learning to ask better
Uh-huh.
questions, and something that even though I think I'm reasonably good at it now after nearly 6 years, but it's still something I still hope to get better at, and as we should with anything,
Right.
get better and improve. I do particularly like that. I know that one of the things that you talk about and work with people on is helping to develop greater trust relationships within teams and organizations, and through leadership, through good quality leadership that does give you more impact. It does give you more influence as a leader. And one of the things that I often talk about and work with people on is taking responsibility for how you show up in those situations, or how you show up each day in your own life, in all of your interactions with other people. How are you leaving them feeling? How are you feeling from all of that? And because
Mhm.
most of us aren't intentional about that. Most people are just going through their life and, get stuck in traffic. You're in a bad mood. You get to the office
Yeah. Right. And
and
it
it all
carries
sort of,
through.
yeah, it all
Yeah.
follows on from there. Right. And
Yeah.
so we're not always very intentional about how we're responding to situations, how we're showing up, but with a little bit of forethought, with a little bit of like, this is how I want to act, respond, and be in these kinds of situations, like with your framework and the questions you can ask. I mean, it does allow us to have that just greater control, the ability not to be perfect, as you say, but to be better at it.
Right. Right.
Still
And to
going to
be
make mistakes.
conscious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
conscious
Right. Like,
awareness, right?
yeah. And, it happens so often to all of us, right? Like last week, I was flying up to Canada with my husband, and it was a family reunion, and we were excited about it. But there was traffic, and our flight was delayed, and I was waiting for a phone call from a doctor. And I just was feeling like we all feel like you just feel this anxiety, like building and building and building. And I knew my husband was excited. I didn't want to like rain on his parade, essentially. And so I was sitting in the front seat and being really conscious and reminding myself what I'm excited about and what I have control over. And what I don't have control over is when this doctor is going to call me. And breathing, like that is something that I know works for me. What I didn't realize was that I was dramatically breathing, as my husband said. And so I was doing these long exhales, and he looked at me and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," but I wanted to be conscious of how I was coming across. I took 2 seconds. I said, I'm worried about the flight being delayed. I'm worried about the traffic. And I'm really worried that the doctor essentially is going to call me in the 30 seconds that my phone is going through the security machine. So I was able to articulate it calmly. And then I felt okay. And I said,
Yeah.
I didn't. And he's like, why didn't you tell me? And I said, because I know you're excited and I don't want to rain on that right now. But then, then we get through it, because I was deliberately not wanting to just verbally vomit all over him and bring him down. And
good example of tuning in. Your husband was tuned into your nonverbal signals.
Right. And we've been together for over 30 years. So I mean,
so you'd hope so.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Good stuff. Well, great. Julie, I know you've worked with lots of teams. You've helped lots of people step up their leadership and develop trust and create positive conflict situations and stop avoiding conflict. For people who want to know more about you and your work, what you do and how you help people, what's the best way for them to find out more and maybe even get in touch with you?
Yeah, so certainly go to my website, julieholunga.com, and I have a bunch of resources on there, podcasts, articles, TED Talk, all the things. And then certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter that goes out once a month. It's a quick read. Just my idea is that I want people to think a little bit differently and be, again, that deliberate leader, so they can certainly reach out. And if they try any of the tactics, whether it's the 3 C's of conflict competence or the titanium rule, I always love hearing how it shows up for people when they try these things out.
Fantastic. Well, lots of valuable stuff for us to take away. All of us can benefit from being able to manage conflict situations better and to be able to have the right approach and be prepared for that when it comes up in our lives, because it will. We know,
Exactly.
those situations will come up. Julie, I appreciate everything you said. There's some real gold in the things that you've shared with us today.
Thank you, John. This has been a fun conversation.
Well, Julie, thank you. This really was a masterclass in behavioral authority. For professional speakers, I think this is the real takeaway. Leadership isn't what you say when the room agrees with you. It's how you handle friction without wobbling or over-explaining, getting defensive or disappearing. Julie shared the 3 C's of conflict competence: clarity, choice, and communication, and the titanium rule: speak to others the way they want and need to be spoken to. You can find out more about Julie at julieholunga.com and connect with her on LinkedIn. You'll find links in the show notes. Her work is essential, especially if you speak to leaders and you want your message to land with credibility, not just applause. And if this episode sharpened how you think about authority on stage, share it with a speaker who still thinks leadership is a tone of voice rather than a behavior. Thanks for listening. Truly appreciate you. I hope you'll join us again. See you next time.